This webinar is part of the Masterclass series, which aims to provide learning resource developers with strategies and actionable advice for success. Our 2014 theme is Maximizing ROI in the Evolving Education Environment. Subsequent events in this series will explore using data to maximize ROI and embracing digital platforms without busting your bottom line. Before I introduce our presenter, I just need to give you a few brief technical details. First, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you a link after the event. Second, during the webinar, all phone lines and computer mics will be muted. If you have a technical problem, you can send us a message through the chat box. And finally, for today's webinar, we will be taking questions via the chat box only. It's located on the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Chris will answer your questions after his presentation. Now I would like to introduce our presenter, Chris Kelly. Chris is the founder of EduPlanet Sales Consulting. EduPlanet provides its clients with a unique solution based on their needs that draws on best practices from sales and marketing. Through a series of proven sales strategies, EduPlanet works with buyers to engage them in a way that focuses on the buying process, allowing your sales team to better nurture leads, warm up cold calls, and make a real connection with your audience. Chris, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you for that great introduction. Just want to introduce myself again. My name is Chris Kelly. I'm with EduPlanet Sales Consulting, and it's a pleasure to be as part of the Masterclass series here for AAP and AEP. What we're going to walk through today is the sales and marketing. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today are going to be general items. The application of how this applies to your own individual organizations obviously goes into a lot more detail, but one of the things I definitely want to mention early on in the presentation today is that there's not a right or wrong answer to a lot of these questions. What my goal today is to give you a framework of how to think about trying to think about sales issues that is common amongst all sales organizations that you can then take back to your own organizations and figure out the best strategies of what best works for you depending upon your product or service and the buyer that you're selling to. So one of the things I like to do when I present is actually start with the best slide right up front, telling people why they're here for this meeting. And it's in many cases the opposite of what most organizations do. So the reason why we're here today is to get an understanding of the key principles around business development so you can develop a disciplined approach to selling. And the key word here is disciplined approach, because when you are selling, you need to have a process in place that's going to enable a number of different items to take place. I've seen some organizations go out and try different tactics and try different strategies, and if the tactics are not aligned, they're often going to struggle as a result. And we're also going to be talking about primarily sales, but we're going to be getting into some marketing information as well, because the marketing information plays quite well into what you need to do in order to sell. So if you look at startup organizations, pretty much across any industry, across any verticals, this is the top 10 mistakes that people typically make. And when you look at these top 10 mistakes, most of them play into sales in terms of building something that nobody wants, which we'll discuss in some detail. Also, failure to execute in terms of sales and marketing, hiring poorly and lack of focus also plays into the sales dilemma that many organizations face. There was a study that was done earlier this year by an organization called the Sales Blog, SBI, and what they found was that 78% of companies out there today have a faulty sales strategy. And what are the reasons why that is? One is lack of knowledge, that there's a number of people who have developed products or have developed a service that are very good in terms of having subject matter expertise, but lack the knowledge of what it takes to sell. And my goal today is to give you some of that knowledge so you can go back and have great conversations within your companies. The second is inadequate resources. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Many times if you're with a big organization, such as a big publisher, you have many more resources than the small organization who's getting off the ground. However, you still need to sell to those same people. So one of the things that we're going to talk about during the presentation today is the ability to skill yourself so you're able to communicate with your customers and move them through the buying process, realizing that a number of organizations may not have the resources of a big company. Thirdly, is not focused on the buyer, and this is a very, very important piece of the presentation. Quite often what I see from a lot of organizations is when they focus on their sales strategy or focus on their sales approach, they're focusing on the set of steps they do when they interact with the buyer, such as doing a presentation, delivering a proposal. All those things are nice and they're part of the sales process. The process needs to focus on where the buyer is in the process, and we'll talk about this in some detail in this presentation. Fourth is an undisciplined approach to selling. And then the last two, I think, are also really critical, such as passive prospecting. One of the key things that you need to do in any sales campaign is the ability to go out and proactively reach your customers, because in most cases, the customers are not looking for you. You need to find them. And we'll talk about the importance of prospecting in this presentation. And last but not least, and this is more common than you think, is a lot of companies have no strategy whatsoever. And what I mean by that is they'll try things such as making a video, doing inbound marketing, things of that nature. So they're doing the tactics, but the tactics aren't tied into a larger strategy, and we'll cover this in some detail in the presentation. So one of the things I want to mention up front about the presentation is that the focus of this session is primarily on selling to districts and committees. When we're looking at selling to teachers, which a lot of companies in the education space are doing today, that is primarily a business-to-consumer type sale. Business-to-business very much reflects what you're looking at when you're doing district-to-committee selling. So if you're looking to further your knowledge of this, there's not a lot of books in terms of selling to schools. However, there's a lot of books in terms of selling to different businesses. So following a number of those strategies would actually work quite well for your organization if the goal is really focused on selling to the district or to the large committee. A couple of things I just want to mention up front in terms of selling to districts and selling to committees. First of all, particularly when selling to the superintendent, your solution must be large. And what I mean by that is that the solution must be looking at a problem that is relatively complex that will bring in the district to look at that solution. So for example, if you're selling a product that is a math product that's looked at, that's designed to do something that may be very helpful to the student and very helpful to the teacher, may not be really on the focus of the particular superintendent. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the solution needs to be large in nature, because quite often when the district is involved, they're looking at big overarching things that will incorporate the entire district. Secondly, and this is a big item to keep an eye on, is the cost of sales impacts how one engages the buyer. So I go to a lot of different conferences like ISTE and AEP and SIIA. So I've been to a number of these conferences, and I've seen a number of people put products out on the market, and they've started their products at an introductory price. And when you look at that introductory price, although it may attract people, if you need to reach out to people, such as doing proactive cold calling, if you need to do a lot of those different items, the cost of doing those things in many cases is going to eat up the profits of what you're trying to make. So one of the things that you need to look at very closely when determining the tactics that you're going to use, such as prospecting or inbound marketing or blogging, any of those things, is looking at what is the cost of sales to do that. So quite often when you're dealing with a telemarketing campaign or an outreach program to try to reach customers, it is the most effective way to reach people, but it's also the most expensive way. So that's one thing to definitely keep in mind. What I typically see is that a price point of about $2,000 per district is probably at the price point that you need to be in order to really have an outbound outreach to customers. And that's something that you definitely need to think about when you develop your sales organization. Last but not least, when it comes to selling to districts, there's a number of companies that I've seen out there that are right now developing a product or a service that they're able to sell to teachers. And the thought is that once they get that sale and get the teachers on board, that they can then go about and trying to sell that to the school district. From what I have seen, there are very much mixed results when it comes to doing this. On the positive, if you see that you have a teacher who really loves your product and will become a raving fan of your product, that is going to go a long way in many cases to try to, in terms of getting someone at that district to make that sale, or someone at the district level to look at that product and potentially, buy a district license for that product. The downside is that in some districts, teachers are pretty much told they need to follow what is going on at the school or the district level, and doing anything creative outside of that is not recommended. So you may have some teachers who get very pumped and very excited about your product. They go to tell the higher ups in the organization about what it is that you do, and they get their hands slapped in terms of, you need to be focusing on the things that are sponsored by the organization. You really shouldn't be going out and trying to use something that is different. So keep in mind that overall, I do think, getting a teacher who is going to be a raving fan of your product is definitely a good thing, but there can be some downsides to this as well. Okay, so what I'm going to walk through next is what you need to have in order to be a successful sales organization. And the first thing, it sounds very basic, but it's the thing that you need to do first is, what does success look like? So in working with a number of different companies, one of the things that I have seen is people will come to an organization like mine and say, we need to increase our sales. We need to get more customers. And when I ask them that question of, what do the revenues need to be, or what does the cost look like, they don't necessarily know what that looks like at the point they come to a company like mine. So one of the things that we try to do very early on is to develop a picture of what does success look like. Because if you can develop that picture and develop those goals, it becomes that much easier in terms of putting a sales strategy in place, knowing what the end result is going to look like at the end. And knowing what that's going to look like is definitely going to help in terms of developing the right strategy, developing the right tactics, things of that nature. So very early on, what I would do is I would write down success looks like, $3 million in sales or 50 new customers, and figure out, what does that look like? I mean, some of the things that you may put down may or may not be realistic, and you may have to go back and try to work on those items to make it into a realistic goal that you can meet. However, once you have those items in place, what you can then do is you can then stop and then say, we now need to develop the right strategy and implement the right tactics in order to make this happen. So we're going to focus on really 3 areas here in terms of what the sales ecosystem looks like. And what I have found with the work that we're doing with EduPlanet right now is that in order to have a successful sales campaign or a successful sales strategy, these 3 things need to be in place. If one of the 3 is missing, typically what we find is that there are going to be issues when it comes to selling. So you really need to make sure that you're balanced in all 3 of these areas, and we're going to cover them in some detail here. And those things are competitive edge, sales generation, and prospect engagement. So what is competitive edge? Competitive edge really gets into the marketing side of sales. So it's, in many ways, it's the value proposition that you bring to the market of what is the need that your product is or service is designed to solve, and looking at what the market demand is for that service. So it's a lot of marketing material. However, I will say, as a person who is focused on sales, this information is very, very critical to a sales campaign. It is difficult to find someone who understands both sales and marketing. However, if you're going to have salespeople going out and making sales calls, if there's not a need for your product or if there's not demand for your product, you're going to have a hard time selling, even if you do those other two parts very, very well. So what you need to do is you need to focus on, understanding what are the needs of the market, what are those unmet needs, and then focusing on, what are those, how does your product meet those particular needs? And what the focus needs to be on is how you can position your product to be better, different, and or unique from all the other products that are out there today. And the one big thing I want to emphasize when it comes to competitive edge is that many companies fall into the trap of they focus on who they are and what they do. So quite often when I go to websites, quite often I'll see things such as we have over 80 years experience. We do this. It's a lot of we, and the focus shouldn't necessarily be on we, it should be on the customer. And what you need to think about is when you develop your competitive edge, you need to sit down, you need to think about what are the challenges that the customer is facing and put that into language where they can then see how this is going to benefit them and really want to get them to take that next step to learn more about your organization and to learn more about how what you are offering is going to make their lives easier as a result of acquiring either your product or service. All right, so other reasons why this is important. So first of all, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the right leads and the right prospects. So if you've developed a product that is designed to go after, third grade English, and, for some reason that you find that it's not correlating with that market, it may be fifth grade English, you need to make sure that you're going after the right people, because when it comes to sales, particularly in education sales where it is a timed event, in terms of people make their decisions in April and May and June, and then after that, you start the selling process all over again. You want to make sure that you're going after the right people. Secondly, in terms of the playbook and the marketing collateral that you put in place, you want to make sure that the marketing or you want to make sure that the tools that you have in place around your competitive edge align, so therefore you're able to communicate with your customers effectively so they can then see the solution that you've provided, how well that's going to meet their particular needs. Also engaging prospects, which we're going to talk about in a lot more detail. So part of selling is that you need to be able to engage your prospects in the buying process, and by knowing what your competitive edge is, that's going to help you go a long way in terms of developing those right activities. And then also when it comes to packaging and pricing. So when I refer to packaging in a software business, it's not necessarily stuff that's coming in a box. It's in terms of the services that you provide, the product that you provide, and how you offer it, whether it be subscription, a one-time fee, things of that nature all go into the packaging, particularly when it comes to a software product. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is sales generation. I like to call it sales generation versus pipeline generation. The reason why is that the ultimate goal of any sales organization is to generate sales. And what this area really focuses on is figuring out a strategy to manage the different stages of the sales process. And the sales process typically starts all the way at the very beginning of having a contact of someone that you want to contact and have a conversation with, all the way down to the end of having closed business in an actual customer who is now doing business with your organization. So to have a successful sales generation process, first of all, there needs to be consistent terminology. And what I mean by that, so for example, at a lot of organizations that I've worked with, they'll say, we need to get leads. And then when we start talking about what is a lead, everybody has a different definition of what is a lead. So for example, some people may think of it as being, an individual that we need to contact. Another person may think of it as a lead is someone that we know who has a business need, but we've yet to reach out to them. So early on in the process, when you sit down and you think about, what does our process need to look like? You need to make sure that everyone is on the same page with the same terminology. So when you're communicating and you have an actual process of trying to reach customers, that you're really able to make sure that you're all on the same page and you're not saying different things by using the same words. Two other things that are really important, and this is kind of gets back to what I was saying about, really focusing on the customer or the buyer versus yourself. You really need to focus on the buying journey of the customer. So quite often when I look at a lot of sales generation processes or pipeline processes, they have things listed such as, presentation, proposal delivered, negotiation, things of that nature. And those things are very, very important. I don't want to minimize the importance of doing those activities. However, what I've seen in a number of cases when people have been in the negotiation phase in terms of where they think they are in terms of getting that sale, the customer is not anywhere close to being to that point when the company has thought that has been the case. So what you really need to focus on when developing these statuses is where the customer is in the buying process. So it could be early on, it could be that they're still trying to acquire information. It may be that they're interested in learning more. It may be, they are in the process right now of defining what their business problem is. So when you develop what these statuses are, really try to line them up to where the buyer is rather than trying to look at your own internal processes. Because if the customer is still doing investigation, and even though you may have done your presentation, you may have done your trial, you may have done all these things, and you think that the final step is negotiating, there's going to be a disconnect, and you're going to have difficulties trying to close those sales. Repeatable process, and this is, again, very, very important. So even though you can put all these things in place and do all these things for one customer, when it comes to most companies, if they're going to be successful in selling, they need to reach a lot of customers. It's the ability to be able to have many people that are in different stages of the sales generation process, as well as the ability to be doing, multiple activities at the same time. So the process that you develop, you need to make sure that it's repeatable based upon where the customer is in terms of their buying journey, but also the resources that you have in place at your organization. Because if things aren't repeatable, it may help you in getting that one sale. However, you need to make sure that you're reaching lots of customers to make sure that the pipeline always has incoming prospects, and at the same time, you need to make sure that you're in a situation where you have many sales coming in at once. Again, so one of the things I also want to mention here is that the lack of having a disciplined approach is often one of the main reasons why we see a lot of companies struggle with sales. And what you need to do in the sales generation process is really to make sure that you have that discipline in place in terms of consistent terminology, but also to have tools like a CRM, to have dealer reports that you're looking at to make sure that the process is disciplined and you're moving people forward in the process and you're following up with people and doing all the right things that are needed in order to close a sale. A couple of things I want to bring up when it comes to the sales generation process. The first thing that I want to mention is that sales is an umbrella term. And what I mean by that is when you look at all the activities that go into sales, there's lots of activities, but they're also very different activities. So things such as prospecting, assessing needs, solutioning, presenting, negotiating, they all fall under the umbrella of sales, and these are things that you need to do if you're going to have a successful sales organization. However, the skill sets being very different, and one of the things that we see in a lot of situations when working with companies is that they try to ask their sales reps to do all of these different activities. In fact of the matter is finding one person who can do all these activities very well is actually very difficult. So one of the things that you should think about when you're developing your sales generation process is to figure out, what are the steps in the buying process, and then putting in the best resources in place to help with that particular stage of the buying process and making sure that things then get handed off to different individuals, different groups. two things I want to mention here. One is that if you're Pearson Education or Houghton Mifflin are a big organization, often you have lots of resources to do this. So if you wanted to have a group that's really focused on lead generation, and then have another group that's really focused on solutioning, and then another group that's focused on negotiating, you can do that quite easily if you're an organization that has thousands of people. If you're a smaller company, that becomes that much more difficult to do. So one of the things that you may want to think about in terms of how you hire a salesperson or how you go about developing your process is look at all the resources that you have within the organization. And it may be that as a founder, you may have certain abilities that someone else just can't do at this point. So for example, if someone needs really help with solutioning, you may be the best person to do that versus someone who's very good on the phone. They may be very good at lead generation and getting appointments to have presentations and to do trials, things of that nature. So one of the things to definitely focus on when developing a strategy or developing a sales generation process is making sure that you have the right people in the right position so they can have the most impact in terms of trying to move business forward. The other thing that I want to focus on, which also gets into a little bit about what we talked about earlier in this section about what is a sales-ready lead. So one of the challenges that I see a lot of companies make is that they're often selling to the wrong person, or they haven't confirmed whether or not an individual has a need or has an actual desire to purchase a product. That the fact that they've sat through a presentation, the fact that they've actually responded to a inbound marketing campaign, things of that nature, doesn't necessarily mean that this is A, the decision maker, and B, that they're actually a person who's ready to go forward and buy your product. So when looking at if someone is ready to go forward and someone who is a lead who is ready to buy, here are the 4 items that you need to look at. The first one is the budget. And if they have the money to spend on your product, that is great. But if they don't have the money, that's an area where a lot of companies get hung up, is that they try selling to people who express a need for what it is that you do, but they don't necessarily have the budget to pay for the product, which leads into the second thing, the authority. So if you get a lead from someone at an organization, I wouldn't take that person on their face value in terms of actually having the authority to make a decision. What we're finding more and more now is that when it comes to authority, it's actually a group of people that are involved. Within a group, there are often group dynamics that are going on in terms of, different people have different opinions and different people have different levels of power. But you definitely need to confirm during the process who has the authority. Third is the need. So you need to make sure that there's actually a need for your product, but also the time. So when it comes to a district sale, quite often there's going to be implementation and other things that go along with this as well. So you need to make sure that they have the time on their end in order to implement your solution to make sure that it's going to be a success. And again, one of the big things I want to emphasize, it really gets back to the whole sales generation process. Many people mistake basic interest as being an opportunity. So if you use BANT, budget, authority, need, time, that goes a long ways towards, so if you walk your leads through this process, that's going to help you really identify who is ready to buy right now versus someone who is just trying to get information and aligning your resources correctly to try to move that sale forward based upon where they are in the buying process. Last but not least is prospect engagement. So the goal of any sale right now is to engage the prospect throughout the buying process. And engage is really the key word here. So when it comes to engagement, you want to make sure the customer is feeling as though they're part of the solution that you're trying to build. One of the big challenges that I've seen over and over again in sales is that a number of people who are in sales often will pitch their product to someone, and at the end they think they've done a great presentation. However, the customer is just listening to that, and they're not actively involved in building the solution. So the things to really focus on, one, is proactively attracting customers. So as I said in the beginning, you need to be finding your customers at all times rather than waiting for someone to come and find you. So there needs to be a plan in place of how you go about trying to identify who it is who can use your product based upon the service or product that you've developed, and figuring out the best way to get in front of those people to get conversations going. Secondly, you really need to focus on the ability to ask questions versus going in there and leading with features. So as we were talking about the competitive edge, you need to be able to go in there and ask questions to the people who are potentially buyers of your product to really find out what their needs are. And then once you have those in place, you can then start matching the features of what your product or service offers in terms of here's the benefit to them and here's how this is going to make their lives a lot easier based upon the specifics of their situation. Thirdly, nurture prospects to earn credibility. So this actually works in two ways. One, in my line of business, quite often I reach out to people, and when I reach out to someone, many people will say, we have a need for what you're offering right now. However, that need does not exist at this particular moment of time. Check back again in 6 months. And what I've learned over the years is that even though they're in that position right now, you really need to start engaging them in that conversation now. However, knowing that you may not have the resources in place in order to have a full-blown conversation with that person, nor may they be in a position to want to do that right now. So this is a place where I think inbound marketing or blogging and other pieces like that can really make a difference. So if you can sit down and write white papers or develop other solutions that are really focused on the challenges that people are facing, or putting out blog pieces around here is what is going on in the market and here is what we see as a potential solution, and emailing this and sharing this with people as they're I don't want to say waiting, but as they're developing their business needs, it's going to go a long way. One, you're going to stay front of mind. Because in many cases, if you just follow up with someone once and you never follow up with them again, they're going to forget about you. But also what you're doing is you're building credibility along the way. What these organizations are able to see is that you're providing them with information that's helping them determine what it is that we need to do in order to be successful, and that's going to build credibility and make them more likely to want to do business with you versus business with someone else who is not providing that type of information. And then last but not least is building solutions together. So when you are involved with a customer and you get them actively involved in a class trial, or you get them actively involved in an activity where they're actually participating in the sales process, that is going to make the buyer feel as part of the buying process, and they're going to be more likely to buy your product or service as a result. A key item to make sure that you do is to make sure when you're meeting with somebody, always have an agenda in place. Don't just reach out to someone and say, I'm checking in to see where you are. Always try to have something in place so you can have that conversation moving forward and moving you that much more closely to getting a sale. Okay, so a couple of areas I just want to touch upon here. So when it comes to attracting prospects, there are really three things that you need to look at, which is outreach, credibility, and visibility. So this is at the very early phase of the sales generation process when you're going out and trying to find the ideal prospect for your product and getting them interested in what you do so you can then move forth in trying to get that deal. So the first thing is make sure that you locate and connect with the right decision maker, and I can't emphasize that enough. So in the line of work that we do, we come across many people at conferences. We communicate with a lot of people digitally. We meet a lot of people that we see on lists. And even though these people, or I say these individuals, put their information down as wanting to get a product, I find in 9 cases out of 10, they are not the right decision maker. And what you need to do is that you need to make sure that you get in front of the right person so you can get that sale to go forward. Secondly, when it comes to these types of items, there's lots of different ways to reach customers. There's lots of different ways to build credibility, and there's lots of different ways to get visibility. And what you need to do as an organization is that you need to find, what is the way that your customer wants to get information from you and really embrace them. And at the same time, look at the resources that you have as a company and really try to match them up so you can have the right resources in the right place based upon where the customers are in the buying process. And then the other thing that's really important is the peak curiosity. So when you go out and you're attracting a prospect, in many cases, they're not in a position to buy right now. Or even if they are in a position to buy right now, they're going to put you through some type of vetting process to make sure that your product fits the needs of what they're trying to do and that you're able to deliver what you say that you can deliver. So when it comes to attracting prospects, the key goal is to pique curiosity so you can then have those further conversations to help them learn what you can do and show the value that you can bring if they decide to use your company. The one thing I want to mention here to be very careful about is to rely exclusively on inbound marketing techniques. So right now on the web, as well as other people in sales organizations, there is a lot of discussion going on about the benefits of inbound marketing as a way of sharing content as a way to generate sales leads. And as a person who's in the field who's been doing sales, I think there's a lot of good that you can do with inbound marketing. I would not rely upon it, though, as a way of attracting prospects. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, you need to be going out and finding your own customers. You can't wait for them to come and find you. And what I've seen with a lot of organizations that have really emphasized inbound marketing as their primary tool of attracting the right prospects is that the phones never ring, and if the phones don't ring, the customers don't come, and they're not actually going out and trying to reach people on a proactive basis. So you really need to make sure that you have some plan in place to go out and reach people proactively. Okay, so a couple of things. So one thing I just want to mention here in terms of the final step, why is closing not emphasized in this presentation? And there's one major reason why. Is that what I find in most cases when working with organizations around sales deficiencies, I would say 99.9% of the issues all come back to the sales ecosystem that we presented at the very beginning. In that if one of these items is out of balance, that it often results in sales not being able to happen. So the real focus of a sales organization needs to be making sure these three things are in place. Because if they are in place, what you're going to find is that people are going to go through the sales generation process that much more smoothly, and you're going to close business as a result. So I want to give you a little bit of information about EduPlan, about what we do, and I didn't want to open it up to questions that people have. So our approach is really blending the old school and new school approach. So I'm a big believer in old school selling when it comes to proactive outreach and solution selling. So I'm a big believer in terms of you need to go out and you need to reach the right people in order to get a sale. When it comes to new school, we are very much in favor of content marketing, using inbound marketing and content as a way to develop a need, to develop credibility, and to help a customer define what that business need is. We're not a big fan of it when it comes to actually trying to attract prospects or trying to find someone who may use your product. But also, we're a big fan of new school selling when it comes to prospect engagement. And what I mean by that is the prospect engagement is really focused on getting the customer to be part of the buying process by doing a trial or doing something where the customer gets very actively involved using your product so they can see the benefits firsthand, which makes them feel as part of the buying process. All right. I know this was a lot of information over the last 40 minutes. I thank you. And I want to now open it up to questions that the group may have.
Thank you, Chris. We will now begin the question and answer portion. If you have a question for Chris, please submit it via the chat box. And we do have our first question. So the first question is, we are currently struggling with figuring out if we are a solution for a school district sale versus a transactional sale for the teacher. Is there any advice you can provide on how to decide which is our best approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so the first thing I would really look at is how big a problem that it is that your company is trying to solve. So quite often what I see with school districts is that they're going to take on anywhere between 6 to 8 initiatives a year. And those initiatives are around big global issues that the entire school district is trying to face. So even though you may think your product is focused on the district, if it's not one of those 6 to 8 items, you're going to have a really hard time selling to the district. So there's two things I would suggest here. One is that if the real focus of what you're trying to do is actually trying to sell to teachers, I would definitely try to go the teacher route. If it's a small problem that a teacher can make a decision around and say, I want to incorporate this in my class and get that sale. However, if you think what you're doing is part of a larger solution that is going to impact an entire school district, and your solution is still, I don't want to say small in nature, but not to the size of what a district is going to look at, I would definitely look at trying to bring in other pieces of what it is that try to bring in other pieces to build a solution by developing partnerships with other organizations. And one thing I'll also mention is what I'm seeing right now when it comes to content, a number of school districts are getting their content right now at a very small price point. They're not necessarily valuing content the way they did 10 to 15 years ago. However, when it comes to professional development, they're willing to pay a lot more money for professional development. So if your product lends itself well to professional development, I would go out and try to find a partner and maybe try to get the professional development sale, because it seems as though with the more recent trends, schools are more willing to spend money on that than they are on other items.
Great. Our next question is, are you finding any success with selling digital resources over the phone versus having reps in the field?
Great question. I am finding success selling digital resources over the phone. However, the expectations need to be tempered a little bit. And what I mean by that is this. So if you're a rep out in the field and you're having a conversation with someone, the fact that you're in their office, you can often get a conversation going and really try to get them and do a demo right on the spot. When you call someone on the phone, it's more disruptive. And what I see in a lot of cases is that since they're trying to do other things at once, and it's easier to get rid of someone on the phone than it is face-to-face, that you really need to make that quick sell and then go back and set up another time to do that presentation with them on the phone about what your product can do, as well as doing needs assessment. I would say, in general, doing face-to-face sales, I mean, they're definitely different. I think it's easier in many ways when it comes to the digital sale because you're right in the office and you can do a lot more things. When it comes to the telephone, I think you have to break things down into smaller steps, and the first step being is just to confirm whether or not there is a need for what you're doing, and then possibly trying to set up a time to go into more detail to assess their needs, plus other activities that will move that deal forward just because of the nature of how the telephone works.
Great. Okay, we have a question. Early in your presentation, you mentioned a district price point of approximately $2,000. Is that correct, or did you mean per campus?
Great question. So what I was referring to is when it comes to a sale, I was referring to $2,000 in terms of an overall sale. So I actually probably shouldn't have said district or teacher. And the reason why I brought that up is that if you're planning on doing proactive outreach to customers using a telemarketing campaign, I've talked to a couple of companies that want to do this, and we looked at the price point of their products. In many cases, we're below $100. The amount of money they would have spent on a telemarketing person would have negated any sales they made. So it would have been a lost proposition. And what I find is that if you're going to have a successful outbound sales strategy that's really focused on reaching customers that uses telemarketing, you need to have a price point at or around $2,000 to make it financially feasible. And again, it's a catch-22 because for many products, you need to be out there and you need to be reaching people proactively in order to get that sale. However, you also have to look at what the price points that you have. Is it going to be, I don't want to say is it going to be worth it. I mean, it's definitely going to be worth it, but you may end up spending more money trying to get the sale than the money you will bring in as a sale as a result of that.
Okay. Our next question is, do you have any suggestions on directing independent sales reps?
Great question. I have a lot of suggestions, but I'll give you the most basic one up front right now. If you are working with an independent rep and it is commission only, I have very, very, very rarely seen that work out for both the independent rep and the company who is hiring the independent rep. I would go the route of hiring a person or an organization where you give them a flat fee in terms of doing that work, and that then entitles you to reports and an information flow in terms of making sure they're doing certain deliverables, and then a commission on top in terms of what they close as a result of that. What I find with the independent rep model, where nobody has any skin in the game, is that if the rep has difficulty trying to close business, or if it's going to be a very long sales cycle, they will give up and no sale will happen as a result of that. So what I find is that a lot of organizations, because of the independent rep model, if they go that commission route only, they don't have to pay someone unless they sell. However, if that person is not tied into your organization and they're not doing the work that they need to do, you're not going to get any business as a result. So I would definitely try to hire somebody, whether it's a person or an organization, to come in and do that work for you while putting incentive out there in terms of the amount of business that they close.
Okay, great. So our next question actually relates to the product development process and involving the salespeople actually in reporting back what they've heard in the field. And do you recommend that they be part of that product development process?
Yes, I do. So when it comes to product development, even in the early stages of an organization, I think you always need to be selling and you always need to be getting feedback from your customers about what it is that they're doing and how they envision your product or service meeting their particular needs. So I would do this in two ways. One is that if you're an early stage company right now, I would go out and start talking to potential customers right away. Granted, you don't have something to sell them right now, but you need to be getting their input every step along the way to make sure the product that you develop is indeed going to meet someone's needs and is going to help them solve a solution. Secondly, in terms of now that you have an established product and you've started getting feedback from the field around X, Y, and Z about things are either working or not working, I would definitely make it a point to have either semi-regular calls or have some type of process in place to get that information back from the field and have a process in place in terms of having a product marketing person go through that so you can then redevelop your plan or re-strategize in terms of either adding new functionality or repitching how or repitching in terms of the needs that you're trying to solve with your product or service.
Okay, and following along that lines, for the smaller companies who cannot develop a large sales force, what do you recommend be the key roles or key attributes for hiring their initial salespeople?
Yeah, so it's really around two items. So the first thing is I would look at what that sales generation process is, or the pipeline process, in terms of this is how a typical sale is going to take place. Everything from the beginning of the process all the way down to closure and all the steps that you need to be doing in the middle. And what I would do is I would try to find a person or a group who can really focus on the area that you have the biggest weakness. So for example, if you're a person who's developed this great product and has great technology and great subject matter expertise, but you don't feel very comfortable going out and cold calling or very, very comfortable going out and doing proactive outreach, I would make sure that's the number one item that you go out and look for, because you're going to have a sales process that's going to be deficient in some type of way, and you want to make sure that is covered. And in that case, I would definitely go out and try to find someone who is very good at proactive outreach to customers. On the other hand, you may find yourself in a situation where you feel very comfortable in sales, but you may not be very good when it comes to the technical side of things. In that case, I would go out and try to find more of a solutioning person. But at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that you have all your bases covered. And in terms of hiring, hiring that person, the other thing I would mention is I would try to avoid having that salesperson do everything in terms of sales, in terms of doing lead generation, solutioning, needs analysis, closing. Try to find one or two things that's really important to your sale. Have them focus on those activities, and then try to develop the rest of your sales process around, the strengths that your organization has.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. I want to thank Chris for your wonderful presentation. And you can find out more about Chris and his company at edgyplanet.com. The next event in the Learning Group's Masterclass series is how learning resource developers can use data to maximize ROI. That will take place on November 6th, and we'll talk about how data can help publishers better invest time and money in product development, as well as metrics for content and efficiency. On December 8th, we'll be holding our annual CEO Roundtable for senior level executives. This year's topic is embracing the non-traditional players in the education market. And afterwards, we're going to celebrate the accomplishments of our industry at the Lamplighter Honors Gala. Information about this and other pre-K-12 Learning Group events can be found at aepweb.org. A recording of this event will be made available. And thank you for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.